I do have a varied career. I like to say I'm a charter member of the 4 Dot Club. So I worked in .gov in the Senate for John Glenn. It was a wonderful experience, a wonderful man, authentic to the core. Some people don't think of that as .gov, but it really is. It's not functioning very well right now, but it's .gov. I've worked in .com. I worked for a bank that had a charitable foundation called the Pew Charitable Trusts. And all of my best clothing was from that period, and I still wear it. This is a Boyd's jacket. Boyd's is a Philadelphia institution, and that's where I bought it. And we were all mauve and teal. It was very corporatized. I've been in .edus, too many really to count, in the sense that I don't want you to think I can't hold down a job. I'm at NYU now, and it would take a nuclear weapon to get me out of there. I love NYU. I just love it. And I've been in .orgs. I've had to meet payroll. Those of you who have ever been in a nonprofit realize that, or a business, that meeting payroll is a very significant source of discipline in what we do. And if more of us in government and in the philanthropic sector had to meet payroll, we might be more effective in our work, because it really helps discipline. And I've been a grant seeker and a grant maker, and sometimes I just forgot what it's like to be out there in the trenches. My career's been quite varied, as you might guess. And I've come to believe, and in this latest work, argue quite passionately that the production of social value can occur anywhere. It used to be that these schools that I teach in were all about government, developing talent for government. And we have the Kennedy School of Government in the United States, and they still have it in their title. And most of our graduates went into government. 75% of the class of 1972-73 from these professional schools went to government. Over time, we started to see our students migrating into the nonprofit sector, NGOs of one kind or another, both national, U.S., and international, because they found it more a better place to be to make a difference, because government is fully capable of innovation and does innovate, does engage in social change, but it's a difficult place to work. And then we started to see our students migrating into the private sector, whether for consulting firms of one kind or another, corporate settings, contractors, corporations engaged in social value production. And we follow our students and we look at them and we want them to succeed in making a difference. And I've come to the conclusion that I don't care where they work. I don't care where you guys work, as long as you make a difference with your lives. I just don't care anymore. I don't think government has a first refusal right any longer. These young people who I teach are absolutely terrific. Among the best students I've taught. And they should go where they can make a difference. Nobody has first refusal rights on Sam here, on Christian over here. Nobody on Nicole. They're great. You too. I have a lot of trouble learning names, and so I keep working on it. I've had them give me pictures of themselves that I use as flashcards, seriously. So I do want to start out by making that point, that we need to be ecumenical about where change occurs, where innovation occurs, where social impact occurs, and it can occur in any sector. We have this view that you shouldn't make profit while making social change, but we got to get over that, and we have to deal with the problems sort of equalizing and dealing with the disparities in benefits, especially in the nonprofit sector, where you really do have to suffer. Many of my students, when I ask them where they might be going when they're done, I start by saying, well, how many of you are going nonprofit? And the kids will be raising their hand saying, I'm going nonprofit, I want to suffer, I don't want a pension, I'd like to ride my bicycle to work, that's what I'd like to do. And then I say, well, how many of you are going to government? And you get some hands going like this, somebody's got to do it. I know it's bureaucratic, a lot of rules, red tape, but you can make a big difference in government if you can get to the top, and that usually takes 30, 35 years, and then you're somebody. But my students don't want to wait, and they shouldn't have to wait to make a difference. So we're working quite a bit on government reform right now in the United States with the support of Paul Volcker, who is the co-chair of our new Center on Global Public Service. So, at any rate, that's an important point to make at the beginning, that I just don't believe we can afford any longer to draw these sharp distinctions about where social change occurs, where we produce social value. Now, let me talk a little bit about social entrepreneurship, which is the hot term. People love that term right now. It comes out of a business tradition. It invites comparisons to business. It is driven by a fundamental notion that we need more enterprise, we need more excitement, we need more innovation. We used to call social entrepreneurship social innovation. That was the term for it. But now it's social entrepreneurship, and it has a somewhat different flavor. It really is driven out of the business sector and out of the notion that we need business-like thinking. I'll talk about that in just a second. I've been working on social entrepreneurship, and I discovered this for 20 years, more or less. I do want to thank Ron Robin over here, who's been so instrumental in helping me further this work at NYU Abu Dhabi. You've been instrumental to it and a real supporter. Where we're going to go together, I don't know, but we're going to have dinner in the next few days. At any rate, and Peter Cleaves, how wonderful to see you again. And all the people here, I'm really shocked that on a Thursday night I have such a nice turnout, and I hope I don't disappoint. I do have a little bit of a sense of humor, so I'd appreciate it if you'd force yourself to laugh now and again. All right? So I want to talk a little bit about social entrepreneurship because it's a hot topic, and I work on it. I write something every 2 years on it because the field is changing quite rapidly. The definition of social entrepreneurship is changing rapidly. The focus of social entrepreneurship on the lone wolf entrepreneur is changing rapidly. And so the field is moving quite quickly. And the question for me is whether this is a useful term to use, whether we might use other terms like social value production, a very distinctive business-like term, basically that you can produce social value anywhere. Social ventures in the private sector, social ventures in nonprofit land, blended. I've told all of my students, by the way, that I will pay for them to buy a small container of Ben & Jerry's or Haagen-Dazs, Double Dutch, brownie, ice cream. I don't know whether you can get it here. I hope you can, because it's great. The brownies in that concoction, which is delightful, and I believe that because it comes in a small container that it has absolutely no calories. It couldn't. The brownies are made by Grayston Bakery, which is a .com in New York City. They're great brownies. Haagen-Dazs and Ben & Jerry's wouldn't buy them if they weren't good and if they didn't sell more ice cream. But the proceeds of that .com, which is in fact a separate private enterprise, go directly to the Grayston Foundation, which in U.S. terms is a distinctly nonprofit charitable organization, and the money cross-subsidizes social services in Yonkers, New York. So we have here a notion of a blended, an interlocking board between the two organizations, flow of cash across the organizational lines, non-distribution of profits by the Greyston Bakery, except distribution to the foundation. And these blendeds, the public-private partnerships, the nonprofit collaborations with government, the contractor work, these raise all sorts of questions about where social change occurs. Let me talk a little bit, and I'll try to be brief with you about what we're learning about this key concept. And Philip is quite right, and I'm so delighted to be back here, basically, this is a hot term. It's very popular right now, and that it deserves confrontation. And that's my job. And so I write every few years about it, and I say, well, what about this, or what about that? Have we thought about this? Have we thought about that? And it makes me very unpopular. I don't get invited to too many things, so again, my appreciation. The social entrepreneur community does not invite me to their gatherings of leaders in West Palm Beach. I'm very disappointed about it because, as you know, West Palm Beach is a lovely place to vacation. But my message is basically we've got to challenge the prevailing wisdom about social entrepreneurship, because there is a prevailing wisdom about how it occurs, why it occurs, and where to focus our attention, largely on individuals, as Philip argued. I made some notes here, and I want to make one thing very clear about Abu Dhabi and the rest of the world. Enterprising, entrepreneurial, and effective societies create enterprising, entrepreneurial, and effective civil societies. They invest in the underpinning needed, the institutions, the infrastructure needed to address social problems of one kind or another, whether it's lack of access to education, whether it's lack of access to health care, poor distribution of vaccines, for example, environmental degradation, you name it. But effective societies do this not as an obligation, but because a strong infrastructure that is problem-solving and innovative and enterprising and aggressive in addressing threats creates conditions under which you can also produce an innovative, enterprising society and economy. You can't last long without paying attention to both. You can't last long. And one of the things I hope to do here in Abu Dhabi is learn more about the enterprising society that you have and the infrastructure to deal with persistent social problems. And we have them in every society. And I'm impressed with some of the nonprofit activity here, and my goodness, the commitment to alternative energy, which is unique and powerful and could produce social breakthroughs that will remake the world. So I'm proud to be here. That's my first point. As Philip argued, my second point is that social entrepreneurship, which is an endeavor, ambitious and audacious sometimes, designed to challenge the prevailing wisdom, to create a more just, healthier, educated world. Very simple. There's innovation in there. There's the notion of newness that we find in much of the literature, that you have to be new, you have to be young as an organization or an individual to have the hubris and the energy to accomplish change. And this is a fundamental issue in the field, one that needs to be challenged. Are we investing too much in the heroic leader? Now, we love heroes. We love that individual that we can identify and celebrate, and we should. But that is not the only path to change. The other path, or another path, is through collaboration, what we might call catalytic collaboration, in which networks of individuals and organizations work together to create the robust energy needed to produce social value. And we're seeing more and more of it. We're seeing more interest in building these networks, in encouraging them and supporting them, in obliviating sectoral lines, so that we're working together in society to address urgent threats. One of the most important events in my journey, my personal journey here on social entrepreneurship, occurred 2 years ago at the Skoll Foundation's World Forum in Oxford, England. We were all sitting in the Sheldonian Theatre, which is a gorgeous theater and has many, many beautiful stories attached to it, and is an architectural masterpiece. And we had an award ceremony where individuals who headed socially entrepreneurial organizations were given $1 million to scale, which is the term we use in social innovation to describe impact, to increase impact. It used to be a word that we used to describe organizational growth, because we used to believe that you had to get to a size big enough to alter the prevailing wisdom. We're now starting, I think, and correctly so, to talk about scale as the movement of an idea through launch and acceleration to fruition. And that can be done with a very small organization that engages in advocacy, that engages in strong dissemination of ideas. It doesn't take a giant organization to produce social impact. In fact, it might be that smaller organizations, being somewhat more agile than existing large bureaucracies, can be very effective. Nice to see you, Carol, for giving me all these students. So, my point here is that social entrepreneurship is an important source of social change, of social value production, very important, often inspirational, wondrous in some ways. You look at these heroic change agents and you say, how did she do it? I mean, how did she survive the backlash against change? How do school reformers in the United States survive when they're up against these bureaucracies that fight change? It's a wondrous event. But as Philip reminds you, it's only one driver of many. And from my perspective, the driver should fit the destination, not vice versa. There are some people who line up and say, I want to be a social entrepreneur. They take my classes. I want to be a social entrepreneur. And I say, why? Why that particular approach to this problem? The destination should produce the appropriate driver, not vice versa. So that's one of the points I make. I say, well, why do you want to do social entrepreneurship? Why not take an existing program, fine-tune it, expand it, defend it, and make it work? Or why not take an existing program that does work and protect it as we go through the inevitable pushback on budgets and deficits that we see all over the world? So there are these other drivers, and I'm not sure I've got them all. You can have social exploring, which is the effort to monitor key trends and alert ourselves to things that are coming that should bother us. And when I was at Oxford, there were all these awards being given. And then the president of the Skoll Foundation, Jeffrey Skoll, who made his fortune as one of the co-founders of eBay, got up and gave a talk about all the things facing the world. Gigantic problems: global climate change, poverty, illiteracy, violations of human rights, indignities of one kind or another. You name it, he ran through the list, and then he finished up and sat down and said, whoops, I forgot one. I mean, this was after, 45 minutes of telling us that the world was coming to an end. And he got up and he said, oh, I forgot pandemics. And so you have the social entrepreneurs that are relatively small, very interesting, operating in isolation from each other, working hard, and then you have these urgent threats that involve tipping points that are coming at us at relatively high speed. So I was impressed by what I heard. I wanted to believe in the heroic entrepreneur. I don't know why I'm so resistant to that particular notion that that's it, that's the answer, to identify the 1 in 10 million citizens. And this is the estimate from Bill Drayton of the Ashoka Society, which is a big grant maker for social entrepreneurs. Bill says there's 1 per 10 million. I say that's not enough, especially given the problems we face. So where are the rest of the social entrepreneurs? Well, they might be in existing organizations. They might not have been found yet. They might be in teams. They might be in small groups. They might be in crowds. And I've talked to my class about the crowdsourcing that might produce very important ideas for social value production. Now, the social explorer's role is to identify trends that speak to the need for action. And I'll tell you, I'm a social explorer. That's what I do. I do research, modeling, projection. I look at what's happening in the community. And I'm supposed to challenge the prevailing wisdom about changing the prevailing wisdom. It doesn't make me very popular. And I actually compare myself to a baby on an airplane. Have you ever been on an airplane, you're sitting there with an empty seat or two next to you, and you say, my goodness, I'm going to be flying with an empty seat. The door's closing. It's a blessing. If you're flying coach and you've got 2 empty seats next to you, what a blessing. And lay out your stuff. And you hear somebody coming down the aisle, a mom or a dad with a baby. And you say to yourself, please don't sit by me. Please. Because babies are inherently dangerous. They're warm and cuddly. I like to think I'm a warm and cuddly guy. Kind of a cupcake. But I can be dangerous, just like a baby. You're sitting next to that baby, and, maybe the ears don't feel so good, and mom or dad can't calm the baby down, and you've got a flight of 17 hours with the baby that's just gone wild. And that's the job of the social explorer. You have the social safekeeper who's really out there delivering the goods, the faithful execution. And they get a bad reputation in the conversation about social entrepreneurship because they're oh so boring. They're feeding the hungry, or they're cleaning the parks, or they're dealing with some problem like, providing health care of some kind. And they're not typically particularly innovative, and they get a bad rap in the effort to create social change. But what they do is very important. They faithfully execute, they expand, they amend, they protect, and they often innovate toward producing social change from programs that work. Now, that's not to say every social organization, corporation, whatever, is productive or is making a difference. And anybody here who has dealt with organizations engaged in social change will know that some of them have forgotten why they were created in the first place. Their sole mission is to exist and survive in perpetuity. That's their job. And they ought to go away. But there are many social organizations that produce great change and need to be welcomed into the social entrepreneurship conversation as partners. But the literatures on social entrepreneurship often say, well, they just treat problems, we solve them. It's a hard distinction to make, and one made by some scholars in the field who say, well, they never break out of their limited frame, they cannot scale, They cannot make a difference. They're so bureaucratic. And I just think that is absolutely wrong. If you've seen these organizations at work, you can see a great deal of innovation. You can see a great deal of passion. If they know why they exist, their basic purpose, they can be part of the conversation. Then we have advocacy. If you've got a good idea, how do you make it happen? Well, part of the answer is to push for it, to push for enactment, broadly defined. Now, enactment of a promising idea can involve a change in mindset, education of the public, and motivating the public to think differently about problems. It can involve legislation. It can involve policy. It can involve rulemaking. It can involve basic changes in norms and values within a society. But getting from the small social entrepreneur's idea, brilliant as it may be, to the full enactment in time to address urgent threats of the kind that Jeffrey Skoll was talking about is no small task. And we increasingly see the pressure for collaboration as a way to get there. Now, the destination is clear, that we have these 4 drivers. I actually wrote some notes here, and it's quite a long talk. But believe me, we're going to get through it very quickly. We do have a fascination with social entrepreneurship right now. It's very popular in Washington, D.C., where the president created a social innovation fund. They wanted to call it the Social Entrepreneurship Fund, but nobody understands what the term means on Capitol Hill, so they called it the Social Innovation Fund. And they're giving away about $50 million a year, which is matched by intermediaries, which is matched by grantees, so you do the math on the matching effect, and they're trying to stimulate new ideas. The focus of social entrepreneurship is on solving problems, not treating them. That's part of the rhetoric. We're solving them, you're treating them. It's politically appealing because the public is seeking programs that work. And social entrepreneurship, in theory, is about programs that work very effectively. We want smaller, better delivery, smarter, more innovative action, very politically appealing. We like business-like thinking. We like the discipline that comes from the notion that we can be entrepreneurs just like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, any of the great entrepreneurs of our time. And if we could just get that kind of thinking into the social value sector, then we can break through and solve problems, and no doubt we do sometimes. I will tell you that business-like thinking is not a bad thing. There's discipline, there's accountability, sometimes more, sometimes less. You get flatter, more agile organizations. I've counted the layers, for example, in the federal government bureaucracy in Washington. 64, just at the top levels, a range of titles that would boggle the mind. And you don't see that distance in the private sector. You can move ideas faster, you're more agile, you're more alert, you're more adaptable. That's great. And I'll tell you, I've never been in a board meeting of a nonprofit where somebody said, let's be more like government. I just don't hear that. Let's be more government-like. What you hear in boardrooms is, let's be more business-like, as if being more business-like is the answer to all that ails us. And again, I think businesses do produce social value. I think we can become more business-like, or disciplined, I think is a better word, more rigorous in our work, wherever it occurs, better in measuring what we do, better in articulating theories of change for how we're going to make a difference. But it's not business-like, it's social value-like. What are the core characteristics of organizations, individuals, teams, networks of organizations of one kind or another in producing social value and addressing urgent threats that are coming down the highway toward us at increasing speed? I would say that it's important to distinguish social entrepreneurship from business entrepreneurship. despite the knowledge we can learn from business entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship works very differently. In business entrepreneurship, a new idea often knocks out the prevailing wisdom, right? I was talking to my students about how many had vinyl records. I can't remember whether any of you had vinyl records. You know, I mean, they're now collectibles, right? So when a new technology comes along and is a breakthrough and gets adopted, it knocks out the old technology and it's gone. That's it. It's gone. Anybody here have VHS tapes? Probably in a big box in a closet someplace. Or do you actually have them and play them? You know, 8-track tapes, anybody? So we knock out these products, you know, a new product comes along, knocks out the old product, a new production method, a new waste management method comes along to save money, which is part of social value production in the sense that if we figure out a new way to manage waste, then we don't have to clean it up later. So as a societal product, not bad. But in social entrepreneurship, when we break the existing equilibrium, the old equilibrium doesn't die. It doesn't disappear. It hangs around. I don't mean to anthropomorphize this, but, you know, you have breakthroughs in issues like healthcare, vaccination programs, and so forth. And sometimes you have the old equilibrium, which like the world the way it was, hanging around waiting for another election, hanging around waiting for another opportunity to reassert itself. And we see that all the time. In other words, in business entrepreneurship, the old equilibrium, the old status quo, knocked out for good. In social change, the old equilibrium, the old status quo, prevailing wisdom, not gone. It's out there. And that's why it's so important for us to have the social safekeepers who are defending these past breakthroughs that we don't want to roll back. You and I, we can have a discussion about the definition of what a positive prevailing wisdom might be ideologically. We may have very different opinions of what a just world is, or what a healthier world is, or what an equitable world is. We can have very different opinions. These are always contested in social entrepreneurship. They are not necessarily tested in business entrepreneurship. Okay? Now, what's the state of the field today? Well, number one, it's changing rapidly. Very rapidly. I can't keep up. And I'm writing every 2 years on it. The field is dividing and consolidating at the same time. One of the biggest problems with the field of social entrepreneurship is that it operates in separate silos. Business schools do it, public policy schools do it, architecture schools do it, engineering schools do it, but we don't talk to each other. We don't share the lessons learned. In theory, this new center that we hope to stand up here in Abu Dhabi and in New York City will be collaborative across the research silos. There's also an underemphasis on good management. Management is seen as an adversary to effective change, too bureaucratic. So we get slack in how we produce social value. There's some capacity building, there's some consolidating in the field, and that's to the good. There is increasing interest in collaboration within the academic disciplines and in collaboration more generally. And there is a definitional change underway. We are changing the core assumptions that guide us in thinking about social change. Let me give you a couple of examples. One of the most dominant assumptions about social change and social entrepreneurship in specific is that we need a heroic leader. Somebody who's going to be 24/7. You know, somebody who's going to work very, very hard. She is going to be on her own. She's got the idea. He's going to work tirelessly. He's a type A personality. That's the way it is. So we've often focused on the lone wolf innovator. Now that is maybe a United States-centric or Western-centric idea. We see in other cultures more support for collaboration. It's important research to be done. I tell my students that this vision of the lone wolf entrepreneur, the 24/7 entrepreneur, is confirmed in the kinds of pets you can have. This is a joke coming, but there's a lot of truth in it. That the lone wolf entrepreneur can only have a cat as a pet, because as you all know, you don't have to do anything with a cat. And cats don't really want to have much to do with you. You don't have to take them out. You don't have to feed them regularly. You just put out a bowl of food and they'll find it. They're self-protectors. You can't have a dog. Dogs are very labor-intensive. You got to take them out. You got to walk them. You got to feed them. They want to be loved. And so, to a certain extent, the heroic entrepreneur has a type of behavior and a personality that is really quite unusual, admirable in some ways. What we often find, however, is that the lone wolf doesn't last very long. That in social entrepreneurship, they get worn out very quickly. And I cannot tell you how many social entrepreneurs, people I very much admire, how many of them leave after 5 to 7 years. They just can't take it. They cannot maintain that schedule. They do not have the emotional or physical capacity to operate constantly. They need help. They need teams that surround them. So the first change in our thinking is that, wait a second, we don't necessarily need lone wolves. We can do this through collaborative teams and networks and so forth, and we're starting to see that. We're starting to see the benefits of teams in all sectors in producing new ideas. There's a wonderful study out that shows that teams, at least as measured by patent, by the award of patents, do much better in preventing failures and in producing successes than the garage entrepreneur. That's because the dissent and the fine-tuning that go on with the team, the second-guessing, winnows out potential failures while generating more successes. Let me give you another quick changing. What time do we want? Like 8 o'clock-ish? Yeah. Well, I don't want to go on forever. The notion that a new idea is shockingly radical. Not true. Most innovations involve combinations of existing ideas and technologies. They may have already been invented, but not produced well, so that it's more a logistics issue or a production issue that's blocking the innovation than the actual invention of the innovation itself. And I like to talk a little bit about Thomas Edison here. Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb. Sorry. It was already there. But he invented a new distribution system. And it was invented near New York University. He ran wires. He had a generation plant, and he ran wires through the gas lines. So it looked like a familiar, you didn't have to rewire houses. It looked familiar in that regard. And the wattage of the light bulbs was the same as the wattage of the gas lamp. He introduced it in a way that was quite familiar so that people weren't scared of it. It was novel but familiar. And we have to get over this kind of notion that we really want to see something brand spanking new that's so radical and different, and we want to get around it. But what we find in the research is that the vast majority of new ideas, so-called, are actually combinations of existing ideas and technologies. And then we like to call them new because that's a way of selling them, but they're not necessarily new at all. Creative, yes, but not necessarily new. And we need to get over this passion for the new and understand that newness can be a product of the simple combination of existing ideas, whether toward what we do or how we do it. And that's what economists talked about in defining entrepreneurship in the first place. It's a new combination of ideas. They didn't say a new combination of new ideas. It's a new combination of ideas, often that exist before. Third assumption here is that opportunities in entrepreneurship occur before the entrepreneurship. That the opportunity draws somebody in, a weakening, a ripple, some sort of breach in the prevailing wisdom, an opportunity to break through is what drives the entrepreneur to act. What we find in social change, and one of the things that we're going to work on here with our center, is the notion that, wait a second, you don't have to wait for something to go terribly wrong or a breach or a market failure to act, that you can create opportunity, that you don't need to wait, and that opportunities tend to come in waves or punctuations, as political scientists call them. We go through periods where change is quite common, and then we go through periods of consolidation and stasis. I think we're in a period of punctuation, maybe for the next 10 years. Depends on how the economy settles out, the global economy, the punctuation is under some duress. So these young people here, they're the ones who are going to make the change. You're the ones. Nicole, you better be ready. Christian, get ready. It's coming towards you, and it's your job, because the baby boomers, we didn't really fix anything. Now, we baby boomers think we're going to live forever. We really do. In the United States, I think the driver of that one is that a baby boomer wins a Grammy every year. For the best album of the year. We still call it album of the year. I don't know why. But a baby boomer always wins. It's usually because of pity. Or they died recently and we want to give them a Grammy. Or they're so old that we really want to award something before they go. It's about the worst thing you can have happen to you. And so we sit there and we say, well, we won a Grammy this year. We still rock. We're still alive. We can still do it. And meanwhile, younger people are saying, when are you going to get out of the way? When are you going to get out of here? It's time for you to go, and it's time for you to take our place. It's time for us to give up the reins to you. We believe in the research, I believe in the research that opportunities can be created through agitation. That you can agitate the status quo, you can point out its flaws, you can create evidence or show evidence that we need to act, and you can push these opportunities through. Finally, this notion that social entrepreneurship, social change requires new, small organizations, that you can't do it in the big old firm. Can't happen there. It's impossible. There's too much bureaucracy. There are too many layers between the top and the bottom. It's just impossible to get innovation out of an existing organization, especially if it's large. And that is just fundamentally false. Now, is it easy to get innovation out of a large, old organization? Not necessarily so. There are adversaries within organizations of change. The 20% of all employees whose job description says they must always say, it can't be done. Okay? But you can get innovation out of an old organization. You can get an innovation out of organizations that has existed for 200 years. Now, we sometimes call that intrapreneurship. I don't like the word. It's not used very widely any longer. It is not a well-understood concept. We now talk about corporate entrepreneurship, basically saying, how do you get existing organizations to bring forth new ideas? You can use incubators. You can take action to incentivize trial and error needed for innovation. You can get good new ideas out of existing organizations, even large ones that are seemingly moribund. You can do that. Now, these different assumptions lead us to think about different types of social entrepreneurship and the ways in which the concept is changing, and the need to be open to alternative models of social innovation as we confront rapidly advancing problems, like The baby boomers. In many societies, we are facing a wave of baby boom retirements. The baby boom occurred in many parts of the world. We're going to retire, but we're going to live. The lifespan continues to increase. Our care needs will be significant. Somebody's going to have to deal with that. And again, that's you guys. David, you're going to have to deal with my aging. And I swear to God, you're going to be comforting and compassionate. Am I right? Your grade depends on it, buddy. So we've got these things coming down the road. I don't know where you are on global warming and greenhouse gases. There's a pretty significant debate, obviously, about what to do, although Abu Dhabi is a world leader in the search for alternative sources of energy. What do we do about these oncoming threats? Well, we're going to need to work together, and that's the final point. Does social entrepreneurship come from the individual or the team? Does it come from the new organization or the old organization? These are important questions, and we need to confront them. But what we are learning is that collaboration across the sectoral boundaries is the most effective way to secure social change, and that we have to work at it. Now, do all sectors want change? Absolutely not. There are parts of every sector that is opposed, that are opposed to change of any kind. But what we're seeing now is the development of highly agile networks of organizations that are working together to solve problems. Now, the downside of that is when you join a network of organizations that is working towards change, you are not going to get as much credit for the result. You might not get as much profit. You might not get as much accolade because you've submerged a little bit for the greater good. And so operating in large collaborations needed to secure social change, you have to submerge a little bit. You're going to have to share credit more widely. And that's a problem, especially in societies that value and want to reward the social change agent, singular, as opposed to the change agents, plural. Now, where are we going in the future with social entrepreneurship, social change more generally? I think we're headed towards a more ecumenical approach, more work on alternative methods for generating ideas, more work on collaboration as a tool for actually achieving change, durable change, more work on the disciplines needed to be effective wherever change occurs. How do you manage networks that are fast-flowing and that break and come back together and that are loosely coupled, as we'd say? We've got a lot of work to do, and we don't have much time to do it. At the end of the speech by Jeffrey Skoll, after he got up and said, well, I forgot pandemics, I was just struck by the notion that we continue to invest in ideas in small new organizations, which may be the place to invest at some level. But at some point, the ideas have to go to scale, and that's going to involve a very different model. We cannot build organizations fast enough to deal with what I believe to be the urgent threats that face us. Now, my little book on driving social change is subtitled, How to Solve the World's Toughest Problems. That's a little bit of an over-advertisement. It's really the publisher's effort to sell copies, and by the way, it's a wonderful gift for any occasion. It's got a beautiful cover, yes. Most of my books have had horrible covers, and there are now 26 of them. And I might have had 26 sales last year, I don't know. At any rate, the cover's gorgeous. And in the past, my covers have been so bad that they obfuscate the really high-quality content that you might read. Of course, my students are reading quite a bit of my work, and they're kind of sick of it. You just kind of hear echoes in the Sama Tower about, oh my God, I've got to read more light tonight. The reason you're laughing is because it was you. I think the point of driving social change was that this is no time to rest. It's a time to invest. And I'll take you back to the initial argument, and then we'll open this for Q&A. You know, it is just so stunningly significant to me to make this case that societies that are entrepreneurial, like Abu Dhabi, which is a gorgeous place for us to work, must have entrepreneurial civil society. And that means building the infrastructure of the core institutions that deliver social value. I'm learning a lot on this visit about what's going on here in Abu Dhabi, what lessons we can extract, what we can learn and pull out, and what we can take forward in terms of strengthening all of our institutions to solve the pressing problems we face. And to everybody in this room who would like to be a partner in this effort with me, I welcome you to the conversation. We are not going to do this by ourselves. I am not going to do it by myself. I'm going to do it with partners and through collaboration and through networks. It's going to be more virtual than anything I've done in the past. Now, some of my friends say, but Paul, you've never co-authored anything. You've never worked with anybody. You don't like collaboration. And I'm trying so hard to get over it. And I've met so many wonderful people already that I'm starting to welcome it. So I open up the conversation by saying, please work with us as we build this. We want to be of help to Abu Dhabi in this work and learn from Abu Dhabi. But we also want to take those lessons and help others, other nations, and learn from other nations in ways that will help Abu Dhabi and forward our work that way. I do appreciate your listening to me. It's a wonderful place to be, especially after our 20-inch blizzard last week. I vaguely remember it. So let's take some questions and answers. Thank you so much for listening to me. And let's see what's on your minds. Yes, sir, right up here.
Hello? Yeah. Does it work? Yeah. It's just one comment. I'm working on an initiative, and when I heard you, I thought, okay, this is the type of approach that we are doing. You mentioned about the networks and social entrepreneurship. I'm working on an initiative for Sheikh Moza in Qatar, and it's an initiative to create jobs for the Arab youth. And the only way you can do that is through networks. And I think we should probably talk after this meeting to see how we could work together in Abu Dhabi. Just to give you a few numbers, during our life, in the next 15 years, the International Labour Office says that the Arab world will need to create 74 million new jobs for its youth. It's huge. It's like 75% increase in workforce. It's like the number of jobs that the Arab world has created in 50 years, between 1950 and 2000, they will have to create it in 15 years. It's huge. And the region starts from a tough situation. The unemployment rate of the Arab youth is the highest in the world. The jobs are supposed to come from SMEs, but the SMEs from the region, the World Bank says, are the least financed in the world.
Right.
So the only way you can do that is to improve the creation of SMEs, the development of high-growth SMEs. But if you follow the US or European way, you will need 40 years to do it.
Right.
So you fail from the start. The only way you can succeed is through networks in each country.
I think this is true. Political scientists started talking about issue networks in the 1970s, and we called them coalitions built on sand. What we were talking about back then was the notion of these networks that come together in surprising ways and then break up. And people join and they leave. There are multiple nodes of contact. If you want to get some background on issue networks in social change, you can go to a website, govcom.com. Why they named it that, I do not know. But what we're trying to figure out now is, how do you create one? How do you manage the unmanageable? So these networks are porous, they're loosely coupled, organizations, interests are coming and going. And so how do you manage? Do you need a node that is really essentially the management of the network? How do you create them? How do you get rid of the notion of control? I mean, once you create them, they often move in opposite direction or from where you wanted them to go. So how do you harness all this energy out there that you need, bring it to focus, and push it forward? I think we've got a lot of work to do on that particular question. But I mean, I agree with the issue of networks as being the likely future. And we talk in my class about type A entrepreneurship, type B entrepreneurship, type C, which is the crowdsourcing model. I mean, there are multiple ways of getting social entrepreneurship into play, and it's not just the type A. It's a good question, and, get in touch with me. Yes, ma'am.
My question is much more manageable. Could you address the issue of the Zakat Fund in this part of the world, and how you see that interfacing with social entrepreneurship in this region?
I can't. I'd have to know much more to give you a reasonable opinion. I just got to admit ignorance. I mean, it's a good thing to admit when you don't know. So I need to learn more. Is that,
I think this gentleman in front of me is actually a better person to explain it than I, and he's willing to.
All right.
I didn't say I'm willing to.
But
no,
I
think
past,
zakat is a different issue. I don't think it can be addressed here, and I think it will need to be
explored.
Yeah, explored. Now, my question is, the change in this region generally is, fortunately or unfortunately, is initiated by governments. That's the reality here. But we see also that this is the trend in the world, from Greece to Spain, Ireland, Latin America, even in the U.S. under all those economic restrictions, and so how with so many serious, as you indicated, serious problems and tremendous issues, how can you compare the effectiveness of the approach, social entrepreneurship taken on a more individual level or organizational level versus the governmental trend right now to address these issues, these problems?
Well, government is an excellent replicator and implementer of large-scale change, but it has to be tuned toward that goal. I may have mentioned before that one of the partners in this little endeavor is Paul Volcker. I've worked with him for a long time, but on government reform. People know him as the finance expert, one of the last standing elder statesmen. But he is very concerned about public service and making government more effective. And what our work deals with is, how do you do that? How do you keep government accountable while improving its ability to move quickly to solve problems and to share responsibility, to let go and engage in partnerships, replicate ideas that are already out there, and push those forward. These are big challenges. Government is so difficult to change, so difficult. And, you know, you have to be very careful of what you ask government to do, because once you ask it to do, it will do forever. Just a quick story. I mean, in the United States, we had a helium reserve for 70 years that was protected by a senior member of Congress. Long after we stopped flying blimps. Now, it was widely described as a source of helium during emergency and for helium research, but candidly, it was just being protected. And we couldn't get rid of it. We just couldn't get rid of it. We tried and tried and tried. And finally, that member of Congress was defeated, and the helium reserve was closed. So you've got legislative issues in some countries, parliamentary protection, credit claiming, and so forth. But government reform is so very, very difficult. What's interesting about Abu Dhabi is that you're still building institutions. So I'm not promising anything, because I've had very little success over the years in actually changing government. But as you build these institutions here, perhaps we can be of help in telling you what we did wrong, so you can stop yourself before you follow us. I got a phone call some months ago from a senior minister in a Southeast Asian state who was arguing that they needed more political appointees at the top of government, and how could they do it? I was saying, you're kidding, right? I mean, we're trying to reduce the number because they create more havoc than leadership. So maybe I can tell you how to build something that can be maximally robust, which to me is the term of art, meaning agile, alert, adaptive, and aligned around a clear mission. You and I should talk a little bit more. I mean, we should talk a little bit more about it, but build it right as you continue building these fine institutions. Yes, in the back of the room. No, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. It's very stimulating and insightful. I think following up with what the gentleman has said, there is a great change here in UAE generally and in Abu Dhabi in particular. And as you mentioned, heroic leaders, what we are looking for. And when we find them at the leadership level, we appreciate that very much because they generate that change on the other levels, and more particularly on the economic side with the entrepreneurship of the young people. And with the Davos Forum, it's happening actually in the women's side, empowerment, and on the business side as well. Now, my question is like this. When we talk about welfare, now we have many countries with the welfare state system approach already been doing it, and we try to compare between countries, like Canada, for example, Scandinavian, US, and also the Gulf GCC countries. My question is, do we need to scale down the efforts of the social welfare state system so that we give more generation, more motivation to such initiatives on social entrepreneurship? That's one question. The other question, I see countries like Nigeria, which have so many problems. At the same time, they have new individuals going into this part of, what you mentioned, with the Ashok activities. And I followed this today. I was very interested to see so many individuals doing innovative works in Nigeria and in many other countries. Right. So do you think that will also reflect itself here in some way? And do we need to scale the welfare state system, or do you need to take a third wave socio-democratic line or whatever?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Let me start with the leadership question, which my friend David Bassini wrote about yesterday on leadership as being the key lever. I know just enough about the leadership development program here to like it. And I'm not against heroic leadership. I think it's a fragile reed on which to build an infrastructure of change. And I think we can teach leaders how to work collaboratively within their organizations, and we ought to be doing that. It's a skill, and it's a teachable skill. I'm not saying either that heroic leadership fails always to produce significant breakthroughs. It does produce breakthroughs. I was trying to come up with a sports analogy today, but of course I don't know much about football, except that I know that there are breakaway goals, but very few goals are ever scored by an individual who runs the ball all the way downfield. Now, I don't know what that's called. It's not a breakaway. It's, and we get that in hockey as well. We do get innovation from heroes who work tirelessly for change, and we can name some of them, Nobel Prize winners of one kind or another. But we do better, not just as well, but better when we work collaboratively. So we need to teach leaders as they're coming up here in Abu Dhabi and elsewhere that it's not just about them. It's how they work together. I like this program here from what I know. And I think it's very important to develop the next generation of leaders. This is a relay race that we're in. It's not a sprint. Now, on the welfare state, how do you introduce innovation? I think we've got some lessons from around the world that we can share. I think that the Department of Education in the United States has been very good about stimulating innovation through the thoughtful application of very large amounts of money. Whether it'll work, I don't know. But government can play an important role as an idea generator through how it funds and how it restricts, and how it regulates. And it doesn't often play that role. It has a not invented here mentality. In other words, if we don't come up with the idea, it can't be good. So I think there are ways to have government play a role in stimulating more effective, efficient, and productive social policy. And that may mean a totally different structure for government. We believe, through our research, that the federal government in the United States, which has a serious debt problem, could save $1 trillion over 10 years by altering its organizational structures. We'd get more productivity, we'd get more faithful execution of the laws, and the taxpayers would be happier. And people who need the services of government would be better served. They would be more confident towards government. That $1 trillion figure has not been enough to get anybody interested in doing it. Senator Glenn once called this whole issue that you and I are addressing the MEGO problem. M-E-G-O. My eyes glaze over. Some of the stuff that we're talking about is just not exciting. And this heroic innovator idea is very exciting. The notion of the mad scientist in his garage, in her basement, working with strange chemicals, and boom! And I love that term. An idea springs forth. Very unusual, actually. Very unusual. So we might have further conversation about this. Other questions from my colleagues here? Why don't we go to you, and then we'll go to you. It's 8:30. That'll be it. Right here.
Dr. Light, thank you for the fascinating conversation about social entrepreneurship. Two things. I've been in the region for about a year and a half. Well, actually here in the UAE for a year and a half, and I've noticed two things that will make it very difficult to enact this type of change. One would be lack of collaboration, which I know you mentioned collaboration several times in your speech. The reason I see that is because I think it's around 60 to 80%, at least in Abu Dhabi, of the economy is SMEs, small, medium enterprises.
Right.
And a lot of them are very competitive, and they usually have under 100 or under 50 employees.
Right.
And many of them are competing within the same sector. And you also have, coupled with that, you have a lack of access to information about the competitors. So it makes exchanging information that much more difficult.
Okay, this is a great question. In social change, as opposed to business change, the lack of proprietary, or let's say there are no secrets. In business entrepreneurship, you have to protect the idea. There's great risk involved, and there is proprietary protection. In social change, the barriers have to go down. People have to be talking about what they do, and that's partially the responsibility of the funders to say, okay, if you work together, we're not going to punish you. Now, this is not a trend here that I'm aware of, but in many countries, philanthropic foundations are all about the credit. They want to name things. That's my person. That's my project. That's my idea. And I funded it. But I think that we have to be careful about imposing the same regimes of intellectual property protection from the business sector to the social change sector. We've got to relax those instincts that I want to own the idea. You know what I mean? So we're kind of comparing apples and oranges a little bit in this regard. Something I should look at. Something I should definitely look at. Last question is right here in front.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. And you said a couple of things that made me feel very comfortable.
Uncomfortable or comfortable?
Comfortable.
Well, then I wasn't doing my job.
About some of the concerns that I have around the idea of the transfer of knowledge and innovation, particularly in a world, a kind of a transnational world with globalization, that how do we ensure that those transfers and those collaborations are in fact dealing with the unique specificity of the cultural realities on the ground of the people that we collaborate with. In other words, we often, from the West, have our own perceptions and ideas as we have advanced in so many different areas. And we often put ourselves in a position where we have impositions on others about our status and our
Gotcha.
achievements.
You're like a baseball pitcher who releases just a very, very slow ball that a home run hitter can just knock out of the park. So I appreciate this last question. Because the way you do what you're doing is to do what I want to do. I'm a social explorer. You need to empower people whose job it is to constantly scan, wherever the idea is taking shape, and look for the nugget of best practice to share with others. That's how people like me theoretically play a role in social change. You know what I mean? And that's why I love your question, because it allows me to say, I'm a baby on an airplane. Let me on board. So I think the point here is that the issue of knowledge transfer is extremely important. And how do we make it easier for people to learn and stop reinventing the wheel, or so to speak? Oh my goodness, we found X, but it's existed for 50 years. One final story here. I did quite a bit of work in the 1990s on government reform and looked at reinventing government. Every year we have an award in Washington called the SAVE Award, which is dedicated to rewarding federal employees, wonderful people, no doubt, for coming up with dollar-saving ideas. This year's award winner, the number one idea out of 18,000 that were sent to the Office of Management and Budget in Washington, double-sided copying at the Department of Interior. Now, my friend over here asks about government. This is a problem. And perhaps if we had a little better knowledge transfer, we'd be able to do some of the more innovative things faster, let alone just the ordinary good practices. So I would love to get to know you better. I don't know where you are, but let's stay in touch. And let me just finish by saying, at no risk whatsoever to myself, that my email address is painfully simple to remember. It's paul.light@nyu.edu. If you have any idea to share with me, please send it along. I write a column for the Washington Post now, and I read the comments there. Please don't be hateful. Please don't call me a lightweight. Just be nice and give me your idea and feedback. I do so appreciate your listening to me tonight, and I wish you every good thing, and I hope I found at least a dozen partners tonight here in this audience. Thank you. Thanks for coming.